Hola, ¿qué tal amigos? Sean ustedes bienvenidos a la entrevista. Hoy me estoy enlazando por vía remota con uno de los autores más importantes de la literatura estadounidense de los últimos años, Jonathan Frazen. Él empezó, de hecho, su primera novela como ya novelista profesional fue en 1988 con The 27th City, la 27ª ciudad. Tuvo un gran éxito con The Corrections, Las Correcciones de 2001, en que ganó el Premio Nacional del Libro de los Estados Unidos. Sus dos siguientes novelas, Freedom del 2010 y Purity del 2015, tuvieron un gran éxito comercial y fueron también muy bien recibidas por la crítica. Él acaba de publicar una nueva novela, Crossroads, Encrucijadas, en español, que ha publicado Ediciones Salamandra aquí en nuestro país. Y para mí es un gusto tener también el privilegio de conversar con el ganador de la medalla Carlos Fuentes de 2012. Mr. Frazen, thank you very much for speaking with me. You've chosen again, you've done it in the past, a family saga in the Midwest. I mean, I know that you were born in the Midwest, you know the Midwest quite well. And you present us a story that has very little plot, but a very in-depth investigation of your characters. How did you choose your characters in the Hildebrand family? How did you start creating them? How did you start imagining them?
That's a very good question. I don't think I've written a family saga before. I think this is my first one. There were families in my other novels, but there are families in a lot of novels. In fact, if you look at most novels of the 19th century, there were families in them. Family has been a preoccupation of literature for 3,000 years. But the question of where the Hildebrands came from, I started with a character who I imagined in the present day, 2020 or so, who was in his 70s. And I decided to tell a story about him and his family. And I wanted to begin at the beginning in 1970. And I didn't really know anything about this character's family, except that the father came from a Mennonite family and a family of pastors. And so there are 5 main characters, and I tackled each one of them separately as a problem. I invented them one at a time. And really, I just started. I knew a little bit about the main character, but when I went to deal with his father, all I knew was that he was a minister, and I had to make it up from there.
Well, I started the novel with a minister, of course, with Russ, and it's strange. I mean, we always have this vision of the ministers as people committed to God and good, but we have here a minister who's actually having all kinds of doubts, who has desires upon another woman, a widow, and there you start with this reflection upon good and evil that seems to carry on through all your 5 main characters. Was this the idea from the start, to think about good and evil?
Good, what it means to be a good person has been a preoccupation in my fiction for many years. That's not particularly new. What I was trying to do with this book, and perhaps with a few books to follow, was to take religion seriously, take the idea of mythology seriously, irrational belief, and I chose to start in the early 1970s with Christianity, because Christianity is the dominant religion here. And yes, Russ is wrestling with a moral problem, and he is carnally interested in one of the members of his congregation, which is not good. He knows it's not good. Although if you look at the situation with many Catholic priests around the world, it's not as bad as it could be. He's not molesting 12-year-old boys, He is simply lusting after a parishioner. Nevertheless, it's always useful in a novel to establish from the beginning that things are going to be morally complicated, that we don't have a character who is simply good or simply bad. The wrestling with one's conscience, the questions of, well, what is the right thing to do? That's really the lifeblood of a lot of fiction.
In the second part of the novel, you present the Navajo people in Arizona as kind of a contrast to the average society of the Midwestern United States. Have you had contact with the Navajos? You seem to know them well. And what was the purpose of having that section with the Navajo people?
You know, a lot of things in a book tend to be accidental. It's the accident of whether I've written about something I know before. I had never written about my not great but not insignificant experiences with the Navajo Nation, and if you're writing about a white Protestant middle class world in Chicago, you want to expand the world of the book to include what the rest of the world might be like, and within the United States, there's really no greater contrast between the prosperity of mainstream America and the desolation of the indigenous peoples of this continent.
You were recently in Mexico, in Oaxaca, Mr. Frazen, and I don't know whether you found any correlation between the culture of Oaxaca and the culture of the Navajo people that you described in the novel.
Well, honestly, I wasn't there for the culture. I was there as a bird watcher. Mexico is an amazingly biodiverse place, and I have a serious interest in birds. I had done some bird watching in Mexico before, in Jalisco, in the Yucatan, and Oaxaca is a wonderful place to come. It is notable that many of the forests we were birding in were managed by the local communities, and those local communities had a strong indigenous component. My sense of Mexico is that although it's a very, very fraught history between the Europeans and the many and varied indigenous peoples of Mexico, that things are not quite as bad in Mexico as they are in the U.S. In the U.S., it was pretty much a total wipeout. There is still, I think, a much stronger sense of connection with the original Mexicans' past than we have here in America, and that was palpable. It led to a. I had the sense that although yes, there are tensions, there was something a little happier about the Mexican arrangement.
In this book in particular, I find that many of the characters, Tanner, Russ, Becky, they're all looking for God in one way or another. Is this one of the essential themes of the book?
I'm not interested in theology, but I am interested in religion, and I'm interested in religion as a personal experience. Perhaps because I'm a novelist, I'm less interested in abstract ideas of religion than I am in the idea of a personal relationship with God. And at a certain point, I realized, well, God is a character in this book. It's not a character I particularly believe exists, but for many of the characters, God does exist, and I wanted to try to explore the emotional experience of having that relationship.
Was Perry the son of Russ's the first character that you started with?
No, not at all.
No.
Who
was, I'm curious because I mean you actually start with Russ the father, but I found
right.
Perry a very interesting, very powerful character.
Yeah, I don't know where Perry came from exactly. I knew there was a troubled child in the family, a troubled child who would get into great trouble by the end of the book. and who would kind of tear the family apart. It's not actually uncommon. There is often one of the children in a family who messes up, and that creates a lot of drama within a family. And again, as a novelist, I like drama. Perry was fun for me to write because he is described as an extremely articulate, precocious 15-year-old, 16-year-old. And that meant that when I was writing his sections, I didn't have to hold back linguistically. I could write extremely complicated sentences with all the words I know and don't get to use very much. And like a lot of troubled people, he's very funny. He is somebody who's convinced he's not a good person. And there again, people who embrace not being a good person, they're fun to write about.
You've announced that this is the beginning of a trilogy. Isn't it too much of a commitment to say, okay, this is something that I'm going to be doing over the next few years. I'm going to write 3 novels that are actually going to fit into the whole scheme of things?
Yes, it is too much. It's I don't know what I've done to myself. I ask myself that question every day now, and it's I know that I don't want to simply write a straightforward sequel to Crossroads. Each book I write has to work on its own terms, has to be its own thing. But I'm now in my 60s, and I have used much of what I have from my own life already in my work. And it's good to give myself a challenge and to go public with that challenge so that there is public opinion to hold me to the promise that I will write another 2 books. And so it was, if nothing else, it was a motivational strategy. It guarantees that I will have to work hard in the coming years. And that's a good thing to have when you get to be my age.
So Russ is the character that you started with, and it makes sense because he has to be in his 70s by the time the trilogy ends.
No, it's not Russ. It's actually, no, it's Clem.
It's Clem. Okay, that's
Clem
interesting.
is the oldest son.
The oldest son, and who has a very strong relationship with Becky. And it's curious. In what I've read of the book, Clem seems to be like the more distant character that you have there. But what were you trying to drive us to with this description of Clem?
Well, Clem is the oldest. He's the most rebellious of the children. He has a particular issue with his father. He thinks his father is weak. He thinks his father is morally inconsistent. That's completely age appropriate. Many 20-year-olds think that their parents are morally inconsistent. And because it's the very early 70s, the Vietnam War becomes a flashpoint. Russ, the father, is a pacifist. Clem is a pacifist himself, but he has identified a way to stick it to his father morally. And that was enough for Clem in this book. I didn't, because I know I'm going to be writing more about him, I let him be perhaps the least visible of the 5 main characters.
Okay, is Becky really in love with his brother Clem?
Well, you know, I wanted to suggest a very close, perhaps unhealthily close relationship without any suggestion of incest, because personally, as a reader, when I encounter incest, I just run away screaming. I don't want any of that. So yes, there was a lot of work to try to hit the right balance between an unusually close relationship between a brother and sister without making it unpleasant.
Well, you actually hit it well, because I wasn't sure. You know, that's why I actually had to ask the question. And have you already started to write the second portion of this trilogy?
Well, I have some pages, but You know, I didn't know what Crossroads was going to be like. I didn't even know it was going to be a whole book. I thought it was just going to be the first part of a book. It's important for me as a writer to not know what I'm doing when I get into a book. I have this belief that if I'm discovering things, if I'm having a kind of adventure in writing it, then it's going to feel like a discovery and an adventure for the reader. So yeah, I have some ideas, but I'm still figuring it out. I don't yet have a sense of what makes the second book distinctively itself.
Jonathan Frazen, author of Crossroads, thank you very much for inviting us to read your book in Spanish. In Spanish se llama Encrucijadas. Thank you very much.
Sergio, thank you very much.
Y a usted, amigo televidente, que hace posible este programa, se lo agradezco también. Esto es todo por hoy, pero no se lo olvide. Nos vemos la próxima.